Hello, I'm Dave Norton, President of the Balanced Scorecard Collaborative, and I'd like to welcome you today to this training session that you have in front of you. Our goal in working with you is to impart some ideas that will create value in your organization. This is all about ideas that create value. So, as an overview, let me begin by kind of talking about, when we talk about value, why is this so interesting at this point in time? It kind of starts with some statistics that that look at the new economy. If you went out today and measured the value of all of the Standard & Poor's 500 companies, what you'd find is 80% of their value cannot be explained on the balance sheet. You know, all you can explain are the tangible assets. So only 20% of value can be traced to tangible assets. 80% is intangible. You know, so what is this intangible asset that we're working with? Well, it's knowledge, it's competency of the people, it's information technology, it's brands, a whole set of things that are critical to creating value that weren't so important 20 or 30 years ago. We've done some research, or others have done research, on how value is created. One study that was done by Ernst & Young back in 1998 looked at the way in which professional investors valued companies. And what they found was that about 35% of the valuation decision that they would make was attributed to non-financial factors. You know, so they would look at the pro formas, the forecasts, the balance sheets, debt equity ratios, all of the financial factors, and that would be one major component. But about a third of the valuation decision was based on non-financial measures. The slide shows these 6 top measures, things like market share, you know, the ability to attract good people, the ability to continue a flow of new products to the marketplace. You know, these are intangibles, people, processes. Number 3, the quality of the strategy. You know, number 2, confidence in management. And the single most important factor was the ability to execute strategy. Okay? Now, think of that list, and you look at number 1 versus number 3. Number 3 says the quality of the strategy. Number 1 is the ability to execute that strategy. You know, what an intelligent investor is saying is that the ability to execute strategy is more important than the strategy itself. So, why is this true? Well, you know, let's come back to the issue, what is strategy? You're going to be talking a lot about this during the course of this conference, this seminar. Strategy is how an organization intends to create value. And if the value equation has shifted, you know, if in 1960 only 20% of the value of an organization was intangible, whereas today 80%, what it's telling you is the way in which value is created in this new economy is fundamentally changed. Okay? The implication of that should be that strategy has changed. It's about managing and developing intangible assets, and the management process has changed. Strategy is different. Now, you read a lot about strategy in the press. You know, a series of quotes are up here on this slide. Strategy has never been more important. Why is that true? You know, because of the observation I just made. We're in a new economy. Value creation is based on intangible assets, not tangible assets. Globalization, information technology, all these forces are turning the definition of organizations inside out and is putting strategy in a position it hasn't been in for 50 years. But the other side of that coin, strategy's never been more important. Strategy's never been more frustrating. You see a couple of quotes there from Fortune magazine. Less than 10% of organizations successfully execute their strategies. Strategy's important, the world's changing, you've got a direction, but your chances of successfully executing are 9 out of 10. And various executives like Larry Bossidy, you know, one of the world-class managers, you know, he makes the observation, strategies fail most often, not because the strategy's bad, but because of the execution. So why is this? Why is it so difficult to execute strategy? Okay, well, there's 2 reasons. And all of our work in this conference is going to be based on our view of how to deal with these 2 reasons. Reason number 1 is there is no generally accepted way to describe a strategy. Okay? Think about it. think about your own strategy, and if you had to write it down on a piece of paper and somebody gave you an hour to do it, could you do it, first of all? And would it look anything like the job your neighbor did describing his or her strategy? Probably not. There is not a generally accepted way to describe a strategy. So that's a rather significant barrier to execution, wouldn't you think? How can you manage something that you can't even describe? And then secondly, the management systems that we use are not tied to strategy. They're tied to budgets, they're tied to quality, they're tied to operating plans, they're tied to all these different things, but they are not tied to strategy. So how can you manage strategy if your management system is tied to something else? Okay? So two formidable reasons. Now, let me try and introduce the other side of the equation, because everybody isn't failing. And in fact, organizations that are using the balanced scorecard are beating those odds. 9 out of 10 organizations fail to execute strategy. Balanced scorecard users are reversing this. The next slide describes a couple of companies, members of our Balanced Scorecard Hall of Fame. Hilton Hotels introduced a program back in 1998. Their program, they have a luxury that many organizations don't. They have 450 business units or hotels that are all structurally the same. So they developed a common scorecard, 8 measures that every hotel around the world uses to manage itself. They communicated this balanced scorecard program to all levels of the organization, whether you were the president of the hotel or whether you were the baggage handler that helped people carry their bags to their room. Everybody knew the 8 measures, everybody managed to them. They had incentive systems tied into it. They had knowledge-sharing programs. Since 450 people were using the same 8 measures, they had an incredible opportunity to share knowledge around this organization. Hilton introduced the program in 1998. By 2002, 4 years later, they had 100% growth in their stock. And their guest satisfaction, why does your stock grow? Because your utilization grows, because customers come back, and they come back because they're happy. And this showed in their guest satisfaction measurement system, increasing from 6.25 up to 7. The executives at Hilton would tell you that the balanced scorecard made the difference. They had good people, they had good hotels, they had a good reputation, but somehow something was missing. The balanced scorecard made the difference. Wendy's, the fast food chain, had a similar kind of experience. Now, Wendy's introduced the program in the year 2000. They had 2 objectives. One was to propagate a standard measurement framework, a standard set of priorities across the organization, so that people understood the strategy. Secondly, they had a second objective, which was to communicate the same scorecard out to the shareholders. Their view was transparency. If your shareholder sees not just the financials, the lag indicators, but also sees the drivers, they feel more comfortable in the quality of management. And that ultimately, what that means is you get a premium because the shareholder, the investor, has less risk. And so the price to earnings ratio of the stock will go up. Over this 2-year, 3-year period between 2000 and 2002, Wendy's experienced a 75% increase in the stock value. Their market share went up by 2 points in an industry that's very difficult to move market share. And most importantly, the value of the organization, increased by $1.5 billion during that period of time. Again, the executives at Wendy's would say the balanced scorecard made the difference. On the following page, you see several more examples. I won't spend too much time going into them, but they represent a profile of many industries, locations around the world. We see KT, Korea Telecom, introduced the scorecard in 1999. 3 years later, their revenue had grown by a factor of 5, making them the #1 broadband provider in the world. In the nonprofit sector, the city of Brisbane in Australia has been using the balanced scorecard for 4 or 5 years. They have superior financial results in terms of cost savings and working within their tax base. But more importantly, they have a customer feedback. 92% of the citizens approve of the way the city is being managed. I don't know about you, but think about your hometown. Would you get a 92% satisfaction rating in your city? Cigna introduced the scorecard back almost a decade ago now. They were losing money badly, $1 million a day. Had a new strategy for dealing with it, introduced the scorecard. Within 2 years they were profitable. 5 years later they were spun off, a $3 billion increase in valuation. And even in complex organizations like universities, University of California has become the benchmark in the industry among administrators across all institutions of higher education in the U.S. They use the balanced scorecard to create high levels of achievement. The balanced scorecard made the difference. So how did these organizations do this? Well, they all use the balanced scorecard. I've said that, but there's more to it than that. We've gone back. Part of our research program is to go back and study these organizations. You all use the balanced scorecard, but how did you use it? Okay, and the balanced scorecard is a superior instrument. It's a tool of management, but it's only a tool. And it's like a paintbrush. A paintbrush in the hands of an artist creates a work of art. The balanced scorecard in the hands of a good executive creates a breakthrough result, creates a strategy-focused organization. So our research focuses on how did they do it? How did these artists create these beautiful works of art and success stories? And what we find in our discussions, 3 words keep coming up. One, strategy. It's not about measurement. The first word that they talk about is strategy. Every one of these organizations were attempting to execute strategy, to clarify it, to communicate it. The strategy was the driving force behind this program. Second word is focus. Once they had the strategy clear, everything in that organization was focused on the strategy. If it wasn't on strategy, they shut it down. If it had to do with the strategy, they nurtured it, they invested in it, they cultivated it. And so as a result, the organization actually got simpler. Focus is your friend. You stop doing the things that aren't strategic, and it's incredible how much time you free up in your life, in your organization. And then the third word is organization. They took this principle of focusing on the strategy and tied it to the way they managed the organization, to the way they paid people, to the way they set objectives, to the way they invested their money. Everything in the management system was tied to strategy. And we use the term strategy-focused organization to describe these successful companies. They're companies and organizations that have put strategy at the center of the way they manage. Strategy-focused organizations. Finally, in our research into these successful organizations, we found that each one of them had a consistent pattern. There were 5 principles that each of them adhered to in their own way. Number 1, executive leadership. It all started at the top, executives driving the program, understanding that managing strategy is managing change. Managing transformation, because in this day and age of economic transition, strategy requires you to change the basics of an organization. Compensation, processes, partnerships, things that only those at the top of the organization can change and even comprehend. So principle number 1, start at the top, get executive leadership to use this tool to promote a new way of managing. Principle number 2, translate the strategy so it can be understood. Okay? The balanced scorecard and the strategy maps provide a way for the first time for organizations to consistently describe their strategy. Just as you have income statements and balance sheets to manage your finances, now with a strategy map and a balanced scorecard, you have an instrument to manage your strategy. Every one of these organizations use the balanced scorecard and the strategy maps to translate the strategy so it could be communicated and understood. Number 3, an organization is made up of many diverse units and parts. How do we make the whole greater than the sum of the part? Every one of these successful organizations used the balanced scorecard as an alignment device so that they had line of sight from the top to the bottom of the organization. Number 4, make strategy everyone's job. Each of these successful organizations recognized that they had to push strategy to the bottom of the organization. Unless the truck drivers, the the call center operators understand the strategy, you don't have a hope of executing it, because strategy is executed at the interface between the organization and the customer. So each one of these successful companies invested heavily in communicating, educating the workforce on the strategy, setting their goals, giving them incentives. And finally, they all made strategy a continual process. They changed the management system, the planning. They linked planning, budgeting to strategy. They had restructured the management meetings and information systems, so they talked about strategy. The whole governance calendar, around the year was tied to strategy, using the balanced scorecard as the linkage instruments. So those are the 5 principles of the strategy-focused organization. In the course of this training session that you're engaged in, you'll be exposed in a lot more detail to each of those ideas. You'll learn about case studies of how they've worked in different environments. You'll pick up tips on how to do it yourself. Our goal is that when you walk away, you are now on a course of action that's going to allow you to build your own strategy-focused organization. I want to wish you the best in the course of this training session, but more importantly, I want to wish you the best on the journey that you are embarking upon. And my fondest hope is that one day when we display our Hall of Fame slides of successful balanced scorecard organizations, we'll see your logo in this constellation of stars. Good luck.